Good morning. So yesterday in the last piece I read, I thought I'd lost a page. It looked like it, but later I saw that the page ended up a few pages later. So it is there, only in the wrong order. So I'm gonna read it, that piece again. And that can't hurt anyway. It's on the ego. So the basic thing to understand is that the ego, the I consciousness, is structured by the human race for the convenience of verbal communication, and there's in reality no I. The ego, like psychological time, is a contrivance. It was a center created for the convenience of cerebral movement. Don't we move all the time as the I, the me? Do we ever stop and ask ourselves, what is this I that I talk about at least 100 times a day? Is the I the body, the black hair, the fair, the brown body, and its limitations or excellences? Is it the mind which has been trained in certain channels? What is this me? After all, is there anything like I? The self, the me of a child, of a young man, of an adult, of an old person, are they the same? Is it constant or is it changing all the time? A person goes through dozens of moods in a day, gets very angry one moment, sad the next, repents and weeps in the third. Who's the real person? What I'm trying to say is that maybe the very idea of the I is again a symbol, an amalgamation of identifications. Somebody says your name is this, and they call you half a dozen times by the name. You respond, and so you come to believe that you are so and so. You're told you're a Hindu or a Christian or an Indian. You're different, smart. Nobody says your brain seems to be dull. They say you are dull. You are black, brown, etc. So identification from childhood goes on. The assemblage of identifications, the amalgamation of identifications becomes the center from which we perceive and out of which we respond. It is a contrivance rather than a reality. Man has forgotten that the I, the me, is an amalgamation of many identifications. You give a name to a child, but the life in the child is nameless. It cannot be imprisoned in a name. The body may be of a girl or a boy, but the life inside is neither male or female. Life is beyond that. We have to understand, at least on the verbal level, that the ego is a contrivance, that it has only a conceptual reality, that it has no absolute reality. It's a very useful thing, though. Here we go to the other page. Let me look for it. It's a very useful thing, though. And even though it's invented, it has to be used in its own limited sphere. On the physical level, we're all convinced that we have separate entities and identities. Every one of us has a biological structure, a physical body, which has a shape, a form, substantiality, and it appears to be independent of others. It appears to be separated from everything else around it. Thus, the conviction that I am the body may be relatively true. But the idea of separateness, the idea of an independent identity, and a concept of being an entity is transferred from the physical to the psychological world. On the psychological level, there is a movement of energy, of consciousness, which we call mind. Really speaking, what we call mind is a conditioned energy moving through the body, monitored by the brain, operating through the senses. Mind is consciousness, and consciousness is an energy. Now, the movement of energy is surprisingly self-conscious and multi-dimensional. It can move on the physical level and be aware of who you are. It can move on the psychological level and be aware of the surroundings, and yet can carry on the process of listening, referring back to memory, finding out whether you understand something verbally or not. This self-conscious energy moves through the brain of each human being. It's a structured movement. It is a movement in the framework of patterns and structures shared by all human beings. This movement goes on, and it has its own momentum. When you train something, there's an automatic movement. That is what Pavlov's behavioral psychology brought to the notice of the world in the last century. This movement is shared by all the human beings, but when it operates through the body, I call it my anger, my violence, my jealousy, my misery, my suffering. When I use the word I, mine, the ego, the self, what do I imply besides the body, the thought? The thoughts fed into me. The thoughts fed into me by my parents, by the schools, by literature, by society, by economical com- by economical compulsions. They are a product of the collective human effort. Thought is a response of memory. The process of thinking is just digging responses from memory, and the content of memory is a result of the collective human effort through centuries. There is nothing like I or me in the movement of a thought. If I'm calling myself a separate ego because of the movement of thought, am I justified in doing that? We feed information, knowledge into a computer, and the computer thinks, it deduces conclusions, it has memory, it can respond. Do you presume that the computer has an identity or an entity, that it has an ego? You just accept it as a mechanical movement which has been copied from the cerebral movement of mankind. Here you see very clearly that it can happen without the I consciousness, the ego consciousness. Why don't you realize that the cerebral movement taking place in this body, having its content conditioned by humanity, by mankind, has no separate point of ego or self or me. It is something collective. I'm questioning the validity of presuming that there is a separate I consciousness. Separateness of the body is accepted to a certain extent as a relative truth. But whether it's necessary to presume a separate I consciousness because there's a movement of certain conditionings through the body is really a question we should ask ourselves. There's nothing like a particular mind. There's a stream of consciousness conditioned collectively, which gets expressed through you and me, through this person and that person. It is shocking, is it not, to realize that I have not a mind of my own? The urge for security and the urge for continuity and survival are the result of this myth of a particular mind, of the existence of a separate ego and the self. The urge for security, for survival on the physical level, is part of the biological instinct, but we transfer the idea of security to the psychological level, and the I consciousness says, I must survive, I must continue, I need psychological security. You see the urge for security, survival, which implies a fear of death, that it's just a transference of biological instincts to the psychological realm. Here the I consciousness tries to survive and continue through its likes and dislikes. The urge for continuity and survival has created an attitude of expectation from others, that they should respond according to my likes, then I'm happy, that they should not do anything which I dislike, then I will be unhappy. The I does create psychological needs, which are human creations, unlike physical and biological needs, which are needs of the whole universe, which we share with everyone. If I see this as a psychological fact, then what happens to me? Do I any more worship my likes and dislikes? Do I make a capital out of my reactions to situations and to the behavior of people? Do I carry the hurt and the wound that takes place in human relationships from one moment to another? The reaction comes up. I see it as a mechanical movement. I see that it is not relevant to the situation. If the mechanical, repetitive movement of thought structure is something seen objectively, and we do not want to own that movement as our own, we don't want to possess it, then I think life becomes very simple. You don't feel proud of your reactions. You do not create an image of yourself or of others based on the authority of your preferences and prejudices. Once you understand that the ego has no reality, then the desire for its continuity won't be there. You cannot destroy the desire, but by understanding the nature of the I consciousness, the nature of the ego as fictitious, then there is no desire for the continuity of the ego, and there will be no fear of death. This has to happen as a fact in your life, and not as a description given by the speaker. This is the foundation. I have to see what the ego is, so there will be no fear that the ego remains and is sustained. By understanding its falsity, my identification with that contrivance is over, and I don't worry about what happens to it. A kind of freedom then comes about. Making time for spiritual practice or sadhana. Once the heart of the inquirer has been touched with the desire to find God, to find the truth, once it has become the priority of his life, then what will the individual do? Besides spending time daily for his sadhana, the sadhak will arrange his life in such a way that he can spend some time of every year completely on his own. Out of the 12 months, one spends some months quite alone, not for going into isolation, but for the purpose of education, when no one belongs to you and you belong to no one. And if it's possible, at some stage in one's sadhana, the sadhak, the practitioner, in order to help transformation to take place, will arrange to be alone in one place for a period of 9 to 16 months at a stretch. The senses have to be educated in not running towards the objects outwardly, and the mind has to be educated in not indulging in memories of the past or dreams about the future. Such an opportunity has to be created for oneself. If one has no responsibilities for that duration, no commitments, and there are no claims upon the individual, either from society or the country or the family, then one moves away temporarily for the sake of education to examine what happens to the quality of life if one does not indulge in the process of acquisition, ownership, possession, or becoming. The practitioner who has intensity, passion, vitality can decide to stay in one place for 9 months. One whose health is not too good, whose mind and body move slowly, let him decide to remain in one place for 16 months. Once the inquirer has made such a decision, then his attitude would be, even if my life goes, for these 9 months or 16 months, I will not move from here. No matter what difficulties come, no matter what the circumstances, the inquirer decides he will not move from there. Without making such a decision, the body does not get the energy for the breakthrough. So we have taken two decisions, one of place and one of time. Choose whatever place is convenient and agreeable to you. Choose a place where for 12 months the water and climate will suit you. For those months you will take kshetra sannyas, that is, staying steady in one place. Even Lord Buddha had decided that he wouldn't get up from under the tree, either until he attained realization or he would die. It is necessary to make financial arrangements for that period. The arrangements should be made in such a way that you provide yourself for at least 2 meals a day, for the rent and sufficient clothing for all seasons. You can make the financial arrangements either through a bank, through family or friends. Make the arrangements in such a way that once you start your sadhana, you do not have to think about these things again or worry about them. If you have made arrangements for finances and clothes, then we start the process of self-education. Now we start the work of digging, so that all energies are directed towards one direction. The senses run after the sense objects. It is their habit pattern to run after outer things, and we have to turn them within. This we can do by minimizing the outward movement of the senses. Already we have made a start when we decided not to move from one place for 9 months. This curbs all movement of the physical body, which is so fond of traveling, moving from one place to another. But even living in one place, one can keep moving. So one decides that even in the house I am living, unless it is absolutely necessary, I will not move out. If I have to go for grocery shopping, I will buy enough to last me for 2 days, and other provisions which I don't need to buy daily, I will stock up and keep. I will make alterations in my diet, so that I don't need to go daily to the bazaar. Because when you go to the shops, you will meet people and see people, and your mind will react to them, and this motion will be set in once again. Secondly, the mind runs outwards in regards to food. It thinks, I'll eat this, I'll drink that. Find out what the foods are that are suitable for your body according to the different seasons, and decide only to eat those foods. Eat twice or thrice a day, depending on your constitution. But once you have decided, do not eat more than that. And if you do, it would mean you have become lax with your mind. How do you expect music to come from a loose strung sitar? So too, if one leaves one's senses loose, you do not hear the music of life through them. The quantity and quality of diet and time of eating will have to be determined so that the mind, on the pretext of food, will not run astray. Do the same with sleep. Decide the number of hours and time you will sleep. Then you go to sleep at the exact time you have decided. So one organizes the day, the diet, the quality and quantity, the hours of sleep, and minimizes the areas where verbalization will be necessary, because one has to spend as much time as possible in the total relaxation of mind. We have been using the mind and living through the movement of the mind all our life, and therefore the imbalances have to be washed out of the system. This relaxation into non-action seems to be the only way of washing out the imbalances. Another aspect of control of speech during the period of solitude is, if others come and talk to you, you do not listen to them. If they come to gossip with you, you do not waste the time. So one minimizes the areas of verbalization, areas of contact with objects and people, where the past is likely to come into momentum and carry itself through us. That is why one emphasizes the necessity of solitude, and one emphasizes the necessity of silence. Not abstaining verbally only. If you verbally abstain from talking and mentally go on chattering, that would be only pretense. In order to get rid of the imbalances, one spends as much time as possible in the total abeyance of the conditioned mind, so the whole being can get soaked in the universal energy, and the apparatus becomes strong enough to contain that energy. Otherwise, the nervous and chemical system of the body can break down under the intensity of the universal energy, for the momentum of the universal energy, which is neither spatial nor can be measured by time, is something enormous and fantastic. Certain experiences may take place to the physical body because of sadhana, but one does not talk to anyone about them. Instead, one writes them down in a notebook, and if one knows any realized person, one will give it to them to read and ask for suggestions. The mind takes pleasure in the experiences that occur as soon as you begin your self education. So you decide not to discuss or advertise these experiences which you have as a result of the sadhana. Now, what has happened is that the movement of going outwards has been stopped, because you have closed all the avenues, all the reasons for going outwards. When you have done all this and have stopped the excess verbalization, then the energy will want to move inwards, because energy can never be idle. It needs movement, and because you have blocked all its outgoing outlets, it will move inward. Even the movement Even the movement inward of the energy will have to be decided by you. You will have to decide according to your background which path you want to take, whether you take the path of awareness or the path of devotion or any other path. It is up to you to decide. But you can't walk all the paths together, and you will never reach the destination. Depending upon which path you choose, you will spend the free time available to you doing the sadhana of your chosen path. While you're spending this time alone, there may be strong reactions of the mind to this solitude. This is understandable. It is natural. If we get carried away by those reactions, then learning comes to an end. Investigation and exploration comes to an end. For the sake of education, one gives oneself a chance. One creates an opportunity. But if one finds one cannot stand and bear the austerity of solitude and silence, or the departure from the orbit of thought, time and space, and the senses, it is better to turn back from the path of meditation and self-education and go back and live one's life comfortably, the way the world is living. So one must find out what one really wants to do. If there is no fear, if there is no boredom and the urge to explore the new dimension of consciousness and the new dynamics of relationship and living is there, then one sticks it out. The reactions of the mind are there. One sees these reactions. The mind never says, I am afraid. It cries, and you let it cry. Never suppress the reactions, because suppression and repression of reactions will take its own toll later on. Every suppression results in a scratch on the psyche. So one watches, one is there to watch the reactions. Let the mind cry, let the mind grumble, let the I consciousness complain and say, why have you brought me to this situation? The complaints, the tears, the misery, the suffering, that is also part of life. So one observes. The observation does not imply giving in to it or surrendering to it, but implies non-reactional attentiveness. One does not condemn oneself. Oh, this is my weakness. It's not a personal weakness. It is the weakness of the human mind. We've been brought up that way. We've been brought up to be addicted to objects, to be dependent on individuals, to identify ourselves with ideologies. So reactions will be noticed, but there will be no condemnation, no self-pity. And if the urge to examine, to investigate, to explore is deep, intense, and vital enough, then one sticks it out. One doesn't run away. There may be a period of feeling weak physically because the resistances in the mind affect the body. One feels miserable, one feels sick, one feels depressed. All those are tricks, are reactions of the mind affecting the physical. There are psychosomatic symptoms. Perhaps if one relaxes in those moments of weakness, instead of becoming stiff and fighting the weakness or suppressing it, then the moments of weakness disappear. An inquirer who is psychologically out to examine and explore the new dimensions, one who is willing to leave behind the classical, organized, standardized paths of inquiry, and is willing to allow the whole I consciousness to go into abeyance, is bound to come across all such odds inwardly. One has to give oneself some time to absorb the shock of the difference. If we force the system instead of giving it time to absorb and tune in to the new, we will be unfair to the system, or out of fear if we will run away from it, then the opportunity of discovering something new, discovering the meaning of life personally, will be lost. When there is no resistance to being alone, then we can find out firsthand what the meaning of life and living is. So, with these clear instructions for meditation and a period of introspection, I leave you for today. Have a great day.